So we're now ready to start the source block of our Packer template here. So we've got our variables in place. Now the next step is to create the source block. And if you remember, we said that the source block is where we specify the base image that we're going to be using. So for our image, we're going to be making use of the Amazon machine image, and we're going to use the AWS builder to then build that out. Now, when we're creating the source block, we need to enter some required arguments. Now, if I go to the docs page here, and if we just scroll down here, what we can see is the different arguments that we need to supply to the source block. So some are optional and some are required. So depending on the section, it's got the required and it's got the optional as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to start adding that here, and then we're going to go through each of the requirements as we go along. So the first step is to actually add the source block itself, and that's what we're going to do. So we've added the source block here, and we're saying what source we're going to be using. Now, if we mentioned previously, we're using the Amazon EBS source, and we're simply calling this source here, we're calling it Nomad. Now, inside of the source block, we're going to need an AMI name, and as for the name, we're using the timestamp that we created with the locals. So we've got local.timestamp there. And we also need to specify a type of instance that we're going to be launching. So the instance that Packer is going to launch and then later on SSH into and then configure to create our image. So we're going to use the smallest version here. We don't really need to use anything bigger. So we're using the T2 micro. And then we're going to specify the region. So if I just sort of scroll up here. So the region here is going to be the US East 2 region. And then we're going to have the source AMI filter. Now, if you look at the docs in the Packer page, you'll see that you'll need a source AMI. But what we're using here is the source AMI filter. And I'm going to go into detail in terms of how we can fill out the name and how we can fill out the owners here in just a moment. But what we want to do essentially is we want to use the latest version of Ubuntu. So we don't really want to hard code a particular AMI in here. And we're going to go into detail as to how we can get that. And then finally, we need the SSH username argument. So the SSH username here is what Packer will use to log in to the instance once it launches it. So this is really important as well. And we're going to get all these informations later on when we look at the source AMI filter. And in fact, that's what we're going to be doing next. So just before we do that, let's just briefly look at the filters block here. So the source AMI filter block. Now we specify the virtualization type, and we also want to use the most recent Ubuntu version, as I've just mentioned already. Now we need to add a value for the name argument, and that's what's going to be used to filter out all of the available images from the AWS marketplace. Now we want to start with the latest version of a particular image. So that's the latest version in the AMI. Now, unfortunately, the process of locating all the information we need on the AWS market isn't really straightforward. Now, I'm going to show you a process for locating an AMI owner ID and the image name, which we'll need here. And to start that process, we first need to know what version of Ubuntu we want to use. So for our purposes, we're going to go for Ubuntu 18.04 LTS. Now, to actually find the image itself, we need to go to the AWS Marketplace. So if I click on this tab here, now you need to make sure that you are logged in to your AWS console, because as part of locating the images or filtering through the images, what we'll need to do is we need to accept some terms. Otherwise, as we will see later on, it's going to error in the Packer build process. So the first step here is to go to the AWS Marketplace. So it's going to be aws.amazon.com/marketplace. And what we want to do is want to search for Ubuntu 18.04. So I'm just going to put that into the search box here. So once we do that search, we get back a list of images that are available in the marketplace. Now, if I click through to the first one here, what you'll notice here is that it will give me a message that says someone in my organization has already purchased the entitlements for this product. I haven't really purchased it, but what I've done is I've accepted the license agreement. I haven't actually subscribed to anything. So when I go to continue to subscribe here, which we'll need to do, I don't actually get an accept terms button, which is really important. So what I'd like to do is to show you how it actually, or the process from the beginning. So if I scroll to the bottom here and let's click on this image. So this is an image that I haven't actually used previously. So if I go to continue to subscribe, what you'll get here is a button to accept the terms. Now, as part of locating our image or our base image that we want to use, we need to make sure that we accept the terms. So you need to make sure that you click on accept terms. It's really important. So I'm going to accept terms for this one. And in fact, we can probably use this as a base image. And the next step is to copy the product ID. Now, if you look on the URL here, what you'll see is there's a product ID in here in the query. So what we want to do is want to copy this product ID onto our clipboard. So after the equal sign here, not including the equal sign, so really important, you copy the product ID after the equal sign onto your clipboard. And then let's go back to our terminal here. And what we want to do is want to run a query. So I'm just going to stick my product ID into my notepad here, or into my notes app. So I'm just going to save that product ID. So you need to do the same thing here and make sure you can reference it later on. So what I'm going to do is we're going to run a query using the AWS CLI. So we mentioned previously we need the Packer installed, or the Packer package installed, and we also need the AWS CLI tool, and we need it for this step here. So this step here we're using to locate suitable AMI images that we can use as the base image for our image that we're creating with Packer. So this is where we're going to be using the AWS CLI. So I'm just going to paste in here an AWS query, so just to save time. So what we have is the AWS CLI tool that we're using, and then we're saying we want to make a query on the EC2 console, and we want to describe some images. So we want to get some details about images, and then we want to look at the available images as to, or that pertains to, this product ID that we've just copied. So I'm just going to delete that there. So just going to delete that and then go back to where I have my product ID. So I'm going to copy that back onto the clipboard and then come back here. I'm going to paste that inside like this. So it's really important that you get the query correctly. So we have the AWS, and then we've got EC2 describe images, and then we're going to have the -- owners, AWS marketplace, and then we're using the filters flag, and we basically want the images that pertain to this particular user who has this product ID in the marketplace. So needs to be exactly like this. Obviously, I'm going to put the query as part of one of the resources available that you can actually download, and you can paste in here like I've done. So we've added the product ID. Now, if I click on the return key, that should return a list of images that this particular user has. Now, we don't really need all of these images. In fact, all we're interested in is two particular parts of the objects, or two particular parts that are returned. So two details that we need. The first one is the owner ID, and the second one is the image location. So we can get it from the first object. So it should be the same for all of them. Now, the owner ID is this one here. So if you look at the owner ID key from the list of objects that we get, this is the owner ID. And we also need the image location. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy these two onto our clipboard, and then we're going to use these inside of our source AMI filter. So I'm going to just make a note of those. And I'm also going to copy the owner ID. So you need to do the same thing. So we now have a reference for that. So these are the two pieces of information that we need from this query that we've ran. So I just quit that here. I'm just going to quit that there. So just close that out. And then let's go back to our source block. So we now have some filters that we can apply to the source AMI filter argument here. So the first one that we want to apply is the name. So as far as the name is concerned, what we want to do is we want to filter out certain parts of the different images that are available. Now, we're first going to paste in the owner ID. So it's going to be straightforward. So we're going to put that in here. So that needs to be in quotes. So we're going to put the owner ID that we've copied, and just make sure I've got the correct values. I'm not sure there should be a Q in there. So let's go back to our query. And let's copy the owner ID again. So in fact, there isn't any Q in there. So it looks like there's a little typo there. So let's save that out. And the next value that we want to add is the name value here. Now, as for the name value, we've already copied that from the object previously. In fact, we can probably copy it again if we need to. So what we want to do is we want to filter out the Ubuntu versions, and we want to use a certain subset of them. So in fact, what we want to do is we want to copy this part from here. So we're going to say Ubuntu Bionic 18.4 AMD 64 minimal, and we're also going to copy the dash there. So if I copy that, and let's go back to our name here, and if you paste that in here, so we only want a subset of the name. So we don't want the entire name because we're filtering it out. So we're applying the name as applying the value for the name. So we want the Ubuntu Bionic 18.4 AMD 64 minimal dash, and then what we want to do is we want to add an asterisk here. So this is going to get any suitable image that fits this particular filter that we've supplied here. So any image that's going to be 18.4 AMD 64, which is minimal, and it's going to get any suitable image, and it's going to use the first available image that it finds on there. So I'm going to save that out. And finally, we need to add the SSH username. So for the SSH username, we need to add simply Ubuntu. And this is what Packer will use to log in as the username for the Ubuntu 18.04, because the username or the default username is Ubuntu when you log it, when the operating system is launched. So we just simply need to add Ubuntu there as the username, and that's what Packer will use to log in or to SSH into the EC2 instance once it launches it for us. So I'm going to save that out here. With the source AMI filter, we now have a way of getting the latest LTS images for 18.04, and we don't have a hard-coded value for the AMI. Now, over time, obviously, we can update the operating system version and go through the same process that we've just done. Now, this means that our source block is ready to go. So we don't really need to add anything extra on here. But like I said previously, depending on your use case, you may need to add or you may need to remove things. So for the next part, what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the build block that's going to use the source block that we've created to then customize the image to our heart's content.